The first time Elias Ward saw the Valorian capital, he thought it looked like the inside of a living star. Towers rose like crystal ribs, breathing slow light through their veins, and bridges of humming glass threaded the sky in quiet loops. Below, the city moved without engines, as if carried by a tide no human could name. His shuttle crossed a lane of floating gardens. Petals turned to watch him pass. He tried not to stare, but even a soldier can be forgiven for wonder when the world is new. The invitation had come wrapped in ceremony and warnings. Peace, yes fragile, like spun sugar. Terms, yes complicated, like a knot tied by too many hands. And a demand from their monarch, Queen Kaelira. One human apprentice would be chosen to learn their ways inside her own court. It sounded simple on paper. Nothing was simple in halls built to make you feel small. The human delegation entered, the throne chamber under the careful eyes of valorian warriors. Each one a head taller than any man in Elias's unit, armor tracing luminous patterns that seemed to shift with their breath. The floor was the color of deep seas. The ceiling held night. Between them, light fell like a curtain, soft and heavy, and at its center, on a dais shaped like a rising wave, sat kaelira. Elias had read the briefings. He knew the words they used for her: brilliant strategist, restless reformer, iron and silk. The first impression that slipped through all that was simpler. She looked tired in the way certain leaders look tired when they carry the weight of too much history. He could see it in the stillness of her hands. He could see it in the way her eyes measured the room and, without moving, touched every corner. She spoke, and the chamber listened, the way forests listen to rain. Her voice was low, unhurried. She welcomed peace. She thanked the human delegation for their distance traveled and their restraint during a long and nervous silence between wars. Then she named the old condition, the apprentice. Not a hostage, not a servant, a learner, a bridge that could walk and speak and understand. She would choose. The human envoy shifted. There had been quiet bets, a diplomat with 3 languages, and a tasteful smile. A professor of comparative governance who wrote letters that made hard men cry. Perhaps a young governor with the gift for saying almost nothing while sounding wise. Elias stood behind them all, a soldier placed there because he had spent years watching rooms and predicting where violence might try to bloom. Kaelira rose. Light slid off her robes like water off stone. She stepped down from the wave-shaped dais and let the path open at her feet. When she stopped, she had not stopped where anyone expected. She stood in front of Elias. The silence had a shape. It had edges. He could hear the delegates behind him trying not to gasp out loud. He could hear a Valorian commander's soft intake of breath, like the sigh of a sword almost drawn. "You," she said. No title, no question. Her eyes stayed on his. "Name." "Yourself?" "Elias Ward," he said. The echoes carried his voice up into the night ceiling and back down again. He kept his posture straight. He kept his hands open and empty. He kept his breathing level, the way he had learned to do when bullets searched for him through smoke. "You understand the offer," she said. "You would be my apprentice and learn our ways. You would walk our halls with eyes open and mouth closed. You would carry our customs with care, and in time, you would advise both your people and mine. It is not a light thing, I understand," he said, "because a soldier learns to lie only when he must, and he did not need to lie now. He understood it would be hard. He understood it would be lonely. He understood it would be a map drawn as he walked. Then kneel," she said. The court seemed to lean in, a single animal, waiting to see a smaller one bend. Elias felt the old training fold over him like a cloak. Obey the local rule, show respect, stay alive. Somewhere beneath that, another training, older still, spoke up from the bones he carried. Kneel to protect, kneel to steady a friend, kneel to comfort the dying, not to be made small. He bowed. It was deep, deliberate, and for a breath, it looked like the beginning of a kneel. Then it stopped. He held it there, spine straight, eyes on the floor. Acceptance in the shape of his shoulders, refusal in the quiet refusal to sink the last few inches. He felt the air change. On the dais, a murmur like distant thunder. Among his own people, a ripple of "oh no." Elias waited for the reprimand, the shout, the order to leave. Instead, he heard a sound he could not place. It was soft, low, almost the shadow of a laugh. "Rise, Elias Ward," said Kaelira. There was something new in her voice, a hard brightness with a warmer edge. When he looked up, her eyes were unreadable and very alive. "You will learn our rules. Some of them you will learn the hard way. Most things worth learning like the hard way," he said before he could stop himself. Humor, his favorite shield, slipped out and stood between them. It was the first time he saw her mouth consider a smile. It didn't come. Not yet. But the idea of it lingered in the space where his fear had been. The formalities moved forward, because ceremonies do not know how to stop once they begin. A treaty clause recited, a seal pressed to a page that smelled faintly of rain and iron, a change of guards at the door like the slow pivot of a constellation. A Valorian aide approached Elias with a cuff woven from living fiber, the sign of apprenticeship. It tightened around his wrist with a gentle pulse as if saying hello. He thought of a photograph he kept in the inside pocket of his jacket, 4 faces dust-streaked and grinning, standing in front of a wall that no longer existed. He did not take it out. He let its weight press against his heart. He told himself again that the past can be both teacher and chain. He told himself he was tired of being pulled by ghosts. Kaelira returned to her throne. The court rearranged around her like stars after a comet passes. When she spoke again, it was not to the room. It was to him, though she did not move. And the words flowed across the floor as if the stone itself carried them. "You refuse to kneel, as we do," she said. "Why? Where I come from, kneeling is a promise," he answered. "I won't. Make it thoughtlessly. And what promise will you make?" "To learn," he said. "To listen. To do no harm where I can help it. To stand up when it is easier to fold." The court did not like that answer. He could hear it in the small, careful shifts. He could feel it in the way the nearest warrior's hand rested a little closer to the hilt. But Kaelira sat very still. The tiredness he had seen at first had shifted into something else, a focus like the tight line of a blade. "We will see if that promise has weight," she said later, when the chamber had begun to empty, when the human envoy had been escorted away with gentle firmness, when Elias stood with his new cuff and a guide who spoke in measured phrases about schedules and lessons and acceptable silences. Kaelira descended from the dais again. The guide fell back. The warriors watched without watching. She stopped an arm's length away. "You have fought in 3 campaigns," she said. It was not a question. 4, he said, because he did not want to lie to her, and because exactness felt like respect, and you carry guilt. "I carry names," he said. It was the truest way he knew to say it. She studied him, as if reading script written beneath his skin. He felt the strange pull of her attention, not unkind, not soft, simply total. He wondered, for a flicker, what kind of weight she carried, and if there was anyone in this palace who asked her how she bore it. "You will begin at dawn," she said. "Language first, then ritual, then the rest." "Yes, Your Majesty," he said. She lifted a hand, a small motion, and the living cuff tightened once, like a second heartbeat he could wear. Some part of him, wary and foolish, answered it. As she turned away, he said, "Why me?" It broke protocol. It was a thin question, too simple for a moment like this. But it leaped from the place inside him that wanted a reason to anchor the next step. She did not stop, but she spoke, and the words floated back like seeds. "Because bridges should know both sides of the river," she said, "and because you looked at this room the way a man looks at a storm he means to walk through." He thought of the photo against his heart. He thought of the city like a star turned inside out. He thought of the dawn that would come too early, and the language that would not love his mouth at first, and the kneel he had not given, and the one he had quietly promised to earn. He thought of her voice. He thought of his own, when he finally let out the breath he had been holding since the shuttle came down through the floating gardens. It left his lungs like a long note in an empty church. Then he followed the guide, toward doors that parted, without a sound, and into a night that smelled like rain about to teach the earth its name. Asterisk. The dawn in Valorian lands came without warning. There was no gentle shift of color, no creeping rays. It was as if the world simply decided to glow, and the sky obeyed. Elias woke in a chamber too large to be a room, and too silent to trust. Walls curved like the inside of a shell, shifting, with slow pulses of light, and the bed felt alive, adjusting to his weight, as if breathing beneath him. He sat up, half expecting the ground to move. Instead, a single chime rang, a sound like water striking crystal, and a figure entered. Asterisk. The guide from yesterday stood there, a tall man with skin marked by silver veins, carrying a thin rod that floated just above his palm. He did not smile. "The Queen has ordered that your lessons begin," he said. "Speak when spoken to. Move only when permitted." His words were clipped, but there was something behind them, a curiosity he did not hide well. They walked through corridors that seemed to shift and stretch, lined with symbols that breathed faint light. Everywhere Elias turned, eyes followed him. Warriors in armor that glowed faintly at the seams, scholars with layered robes that whispered as they passed, servants moving with grace too practiced to be accidental. He was the anomaly, the rough edge among polished stone. Their first stop was not a classroom, not a hall, but an open ring suspended high above the city. Here, the wind carried scents of metal and rain, and in the center stood Kaelira. She looked different in the light, less like a distant figure, and more like something carved by patience and pressure. Her robes were simple, but the crown, a band of silver that seemed to flow even when still, reminded him where he stood. "You slept?" she asked, not looking at him at first. Her gaze was on the horizon where spires caught the newborn sun. "Well, enough," he said. "Your beds breathe." That made her turn. A faint crease appeared at the corner of her mouth, something close to humor, but too measured to be called a smile. "They adjust to their occupant," she said. "Comfort is not weakness here, but it can make one forget the ground is always beneath them." "I don't forget the ground," he said. "I'm used to hitting it." That earned him a longer look, cool and curious. She gestured, and the silver-veined guide stepped back. Now it was only the Queen and the soldier in the ring of glass. "You are here to learn," she said. "Not to teach, not to question. Our ways are older than your cities, but bridges require weight on both sides, and I intend to see if you can hold." "I'll try," he said. "Trying's kept me alive so far." She stepped closer, circling him the way a strategist studies a map. "You are disciplined," she said, "but discipline can crack when forced into shapes it does not know. Today, you will learn language. Ours is not sound alone. It is movement, breath, pulse. It is meaning carried in the angle of your head, and the pause between words. You will fail, but you will fail here, where no one else sees." Her tone was even, but the last sentence was almost kind. Elias caught it like a thread of warmth in cold water. "Thank you for that," he said. Language was not language, as he knew it. They placed a cuff on his wrist, the same living fiber that had greeted him yesterday, and it pulsed against his skin, syncing with his heart. Words bloomed in his ears like music, then fractured into sound he could not catch. Kaelira spoke, slow, deliberate, and the cuff tightened when his mimicry failed. He repeated sounds, shapes, movements. Sometimes she corrected him sharply, other times she let him struggle, watching. Every mistake was met with silence, which somehow stung more than rebuked ours past, but he did not stop. Sweat traced his spine. His shoulders burned from gestures he could not master, but he kept his eyes on hers. Once, she stepped behind him to adjust the tilt of his chin, her hand firm but not unkind. The world went still in that moment, court far below, the humming of the city quiet, the pulse of the cuff steady and slow. "You must listen not with your ears, but with your bones," she said softly, and something in the way she said it made him believe her. When the session ended, he expected dismissal, maybe even indifference. Instead, kaelira lingered. "You learn quickly," she said, "but you are impatient. Patience is not the absence of speed, it is the art of knowing when to move. You must learn that, and you must learn I'm hard to break," he said, too tired to filter himself. Her eyes sharpened, but there was no anger. "We will see." They left the ring and moved deeper into the palace. The next hall was narrower, lined with statues of warriors whose faces bore scars carved into stone. Kaelira slowed near one. "This was my father," she said suddenly, almost to herself. "He taught me that power is a loan, not a gift. It must be paid for every day." She turned to him. "Remember that." "I will," he said, meaning it. He wondered if she noticed that his voice carried not just respect but something else. Something forming at the edge of curiosity perhaps, or the start of understanding. Before the day ended, another surprise waited. In the training grounds below, a group of young Valorian cadets gathered for a demonstration. Kaelira stood above them, commanding their attention. "Today," she said, "you will see how quickly an outsider can learn." The cadets looked at Elias with open doubt, some with faint disdain. He understood that look. He had worn it once. They gave him a weapon, a slender staff that bent but would not break. His first opponent was fast, precise, too confident. Elias took a hit across his shoulder before he found rhythm. By the second exchange, he used weight and timing, not strength, to turn the tide. The cadet's weapon clattered to the ground. There was no cheer, only the sound of the Queen's voice. Again. By the fourth match, Elias was breathing hard, his shoulder aching, but he was still standing. When the session ended, Kaelira descended to the arena floor. The cadets straightened, silent. She studied him, tilting her head slightly. "You lose ground, but do not panic. You move as though you expect pain. Pain is predictable," he said. "Surprise is worse." And there, for the briefest moment, the Queen's composure softened. "Then prepare for surprise, Elias Ward," she said. "This court will not give you peace, just because you came here for it." He looked at her, the staff still warm in his hands, and felt the weight of those words settled deep. The palace, the lessons, the battles, they were all pieces of something larger, something he had yet to see. And somewhere, in the way she watched him, with that careful, measuring gaze, he thought he saw not just curiosity, but the first hint of trust. The third morning arrived, with no warning, only the sharp chime of the living cuff tightening around Elias's wrist, a silent summons that felt more like a challenge than an invitation. The palace was still shadowed, a faint mist curling through its glass corridors, and the air smelled of rain and metal. The guide walked him through unfamiliar halls, each turn revealing something stranger. A room where books floated like birds, another where statues moved, just enough to make you question if you'd imagined it. Every step reminded him he was the outsider. Every glance from the silent guards seemed to weigh his worth. When the doors opened, he did not find the Queen. He found the council, a wide circular chamber, cold and watchful, lined with figures, dressed in silver and indigo. The air felt heavy, like a storm pressed against glass. Kaelira sat at the far end, her posture sharp as a blade, her crown dimmed to a thin glimmer. She did not look at him immediately, which told him this was a test. "You have been here 3 days," said a counselor, his voice smooth but edged. "You were chosen, though you do not belong." Before this chamber decides your place, we must see if the queen's faith was wasted. Questions followed. Not about treaties or war, but about loyalty. Where would he stand if humans in Valoria turned on each other again? Why did he refuse to kneel? Why did the queen choose a soldier and not a scholar? Elias answered each with calm words and steady eyes, but each answer carried more weight than he liked. When one asked, "What debt do you owe our queen?" he said only, "None. I am here to learn, not to serve." A ripple moved through the chamber like a whisper carried on knives. Finally, kaelira spoke, her voice cutting through their murmurs. "Enough. The council forgets its role. He is my apprentice, not theirs. If he fails, it will be by my judgment, not theirs." The council fell silent, but the tension remained, coiled and alive. Afterward, she led him out without a word. They descended a narrow stairway into what seemed like the heart of the palace. The air grew cooler, the lights dimmer, until they entered a long corridor lined with shimmering screens. "You will see what few have seen," she said, finally breaking the silence. "But understand this, knowledge here is not a gift. It is a weapon, and it will cut you if you are careless." The corridor ended at a single vault door, etched with lines of light. It opened without sound, revealing something Elias could not name. An archive, but alive memories and records swirling as strands of light. Voices speaking softly from nowhere, images forming and breaking like reflections. In water. Kaelira moved between them with practiced grace. "Our strength is not only in battle," she said. "It is in knowing. Here are histories, betrayals, victories, and here, too, are the shadows, the things even our people forget. Watch carefully." She showed him fragments. A war fought long, before humans looked at the stars. A queen betrayed by her closest guard, a treaty sealed with blood. And then, more quietly, something closer, pattern of small disappearances. Sealed files, subtle changes in the palace guards. "Someone moves against me," she said, her tone flat, but edged with something sharper. "They will not strike. Openly, not yet. But you must learn to see the cracks." Elias studied the records, his soldier's mind piecing together what little it could. Whoever the enemy was, they were careful. Too careful. He asked the question that hung between them. "Why tell me this? I'm new. I don't even know the names in these stories." Kaelira stopped, turning to face him fully. Her eyes were calm, but there was no distance now. "Because sometimes the newest eyes see what the old ones cannot. Because I chose you for more than a lesson." Their closeness was unexpected. The dim light curved across her face, catching the faint silver in her crown. He could see the fatigue hidden behind her calm, the weight she carried like armor. For a moment, she looked less like a monarch, and more like someone who had learned too early that trust was fragile. They moved deeper into the archives, but the feeling stayed a thread of trust forming between them. It grew stronger when alarms suddenly flared, a low thrum vibrating through the floor. The lights shifted to warning red, and the vault seemed to breathe faster. Kaelira's expression hardened instantly. "Someone should not be here," she said. "Stay close." Shadows moved in the corner of Elias's eye, two figures, fast and quiet, slipping through the far corridor. Instinct took over. He moved without asking, low and silent, trailing them while the queen followed at a measured pace. The palace had seemed like a temple before. Now it felt like a maze with teeth. The intruders were skilled, but they were not. Expecting him, one turned too sharply, and Elias struck a quick tackle. The sound of breath knocked out, the hiss of a weapon skidding across the floor. The other escaped, and Kaelira's voice cut the air like a command. "Let them run. One is enough." The captured figure was masked, silent, refusing to meet the queen's gaze. Elias kept his hold firm but respectful, waiting. Kaelira stepped closer, her voice calm and cold. "There will be no easy answers today," she said, "but now you see why you are here. Later, When the danger passed, and the vault was sealed again, she stopped him before they left. "You did well," she said quietly. "You moved without hesitation, but you did not kill. That matters. Reflex," he said. "You save a target alive, if you want to know the real threat." She considered that, her gaze lingering longer than before. "Perhaps you are more useful than even I imagined." The day ended, but the tension did not. Something in the palace had shifted. The queen now walked with guards closer than before, and Elias felt their looks sharpen. Somewhere, behind all that power and protocol, someone was planning, and Elias knew this was only the first shadow he would face. The fourth day did not begin with ceremony. It began with silence. The palace that had felt like a hive of light and sound seemed unnaturally still. Elias woke before the cuff could summon him, an old soldier's habit prickling at the back of his neck. Something about the quiet said danger. When the chime finally came, it was softer than usual, and the guide who came for him spoke less. They walked not through the glass corridors, or the training rings, but down, always down, until the air grew cold and damp. The walls here were carved from dark stone instead of glass, marked with scars like clawed signatures. Torches flickered instead of lights. At the end of a narrow hall, kaelira waited not in her usual robes of silver and light, but in dark travel gear, a long cloak falling behind her like a slice of night. 2 guards stood near, but she dismissed them with emotion. "You will leave the palace today," she said. "We hunt, but not for sport. There is something in the outer lands that threatens us, and I intend to see it with my own eyes. You will come." Elias knew better than to ask if he had a choice. Instead, he adjusted his stride to match hers. They moved quickly through side gates, into an airship no larger than a patrol craft. The engines purred low, and soon the city was behind them, shrinking like a dream in the distance. Below, the world changed. Bright towers gave way to forests of stone and rivers that glowed faintly blue, winding like veins across the land. Kaelira did not speak at first, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She carried herself like someone who had stopped trusting her walls. "Finally," she said, 3 attacks in 4 days, all inside the palace. It will not be 4. Elias studied her profile, the set of her jaw, the shadow in her eyes. "You think they're coming from outside. I think they are coming from everywhere," she said. "Inside, outside, old enemies, new. The council is divided, and someone is feeding them fear. I need to know where the cracks are." The outer lands were nothing like the capital. Wild forests of steel-twined trees bent low under invisible winds. Creatures moved at the edge of vision, their eyes reflecting shards of light. The air was thick with sound chirps, hums, a distant thrumming like machinery buried deep in the soil. Their small party, just kaelira, Elias, and the silent guide, moved quickly, but carefully. Kaelira lead, always sure-footed, her hands sometimes brushing the trunks of strange trees, as if listening to their warnings. Elias followed, his senses awake, noting tracks that seemed too fresh, shadows that moved too easily. It was by a cliff edge, overlooking a valley of silver mist, that they found the first sign. A broken device, half buried in the soil, human-made, but altered, its markings cut away. Kaelira crouched, examining it with sharp fingers. "Ours?" she asked without looking at him. Double quotes. "No," Elias said. "Not anymore. Someone's changed it. Could be scavengers, could be worse." The guide made a soft clicking sound, and before they could move, a low growl echoed from the fog below. Elias's instincts tightened. Something was coming. They pulled back just as a figure emerged. Not beast, not fully machine, but something between. Tall, armored, in pieces of salvaged tech, its face covered. It moved with precision, too fast for an animal, too quiet for a soldier. Elias didn't wait. He pulled kaelira back behind the trees as the thing turned toward them. The next moments were fast and sharp. the hiss of a blade cutting air, the crack of branches as the creature lunged, and the flash of light as kaelira's wrist flicked and something metallic whirled out a weapon curved like a crescent, humming as it moved. Elias stepped forward, catching the creature's arm with the staff they carried, twisting, using its weight against it. The fight was brief, brutal, and ended with the creature pinned under Elias's knee. Its blade kicked far away. Kaelira stood above it, calm even in the rush of battle. She pulled the mask from its face and stared. The skin beneath was familiar. Not machine, not alien, human. "You see now why I do not trust the treaty," she said, voice low. The captive said nothing, only glared. Kaelira's gaze turned to Elias. "Someone is moving pieces where we cannot see. This is not rebellion. This is something worse." They bound the figure and moved on, faster now, cutting through the forest, toward a hidden outpost. Kaelira knew. The path was dangerous bridges of stone that crumbled underfoot. Creatures that watched but did not strike, and always the sound of that strange hum beneath the ground. Elias stayed close, his shoulder brushing hers more than once as they moved, through narrow passes. When they reached the outpost, the sun was lowering. It was small, built into the rock, a single room with walls lined by maps and strange glowing crystals. Kaelira leaned over one map, her fingers tracing routes like memories. "They are using old supply channels," she said. "Routes even some of my council have forgotten. Someone is feeding them information." She looked up at Elias. "You understand why I chose you now?" "Because I don't know your politics," he said. "Because I can see without the same blinders." She gave the smallest nod. "And because I needed someone who would stand when others would bow." The moment stretched outside. The mist turned gold, and inside the quiet room, something softened between them. Not trust, not yet, but a recognition of shared ground. Later, when night fell, they sat by a small fire inside the outpost, the captive guarded, the guide silent. Kaelira spoke quietly, almost to herself. "Every ruler carries a blade they cannot see. Sometimes it is in the hand of a friend. Sometimes it is in their own." She looked at him, and there was something different in her eyes, not cold, not commanding. "I do not like being blind." "Then we'll find your blade," he said, "and we'll break it." She watched him for a long moment, the firelight touching her face. "Be careful, Elias Ward," she said finally. "This game is larger than you know." The sound of something moving in the night cut her words short. Elias turned toward the darkness beyond the doorway. This time, he felt certain they were not alone. The fifth day began, not with the cautious hush of travel, but with tension, thick enough to taste. The outpost's walls hummed faintly, reacting to unknown energies in the rocks, as if the land itself kept secrets. Elias woke to find Kaelira already awake, her cloak gathered around her, staring at the maps lit by flickering crystal light. She didn't turn when he approached. "We are not as hidden as I hoped," she said quietly. "Someone knows we are here." There was no fear in her voice, only calculation. Elias glanced at the captive, the human intruder they'd caught still, bound and silent in the corner. The man's eyes were hard, unbroken. Whoever he served, his loyalty was stone. Kaelira studied the maps with surgical focus. "These routes," she said, tapping an old channel carved through the rocks, "were meant for supply runs before the last war. Only a handful of council members know them." She finally looked up at Elias. "Which means the knife is close to my table." They moved quickly. The outpost was abandoned within the hour, the prisoner taken with them. The guide led the way, but Kaelira walked beside Elias now, matching his pace. It felt less like a queen and soldier, and more like two people quietly bracing for impact. They traveled through lands few dared to cross, black cliffs that hummed when you touched them, fields of grass so fine it shimmered like water, and caves where echoes carried too far, as if the walls themselves were listening. Kaelira was at home in the strange terrain, her steps sure. Elias was wary but adaptable, each movement quiet, controlled. As they passed through a canyon at dusk, the ambush came. A shrill sound sliced the air, and then bolts of light exploded against the rocks, throwing shadows everywhere. Figures moved fast, cloaked and silent, cutting off the canyon's exits. The guide drew a weapon. Elias had already pulled Kaelira against the wall, scanning angles. "They know our path," he said. Kaelira's single quotes as reply was calm, but firm. "We hold here." What followed was sharp and brutal. The attackers were trained swift, precise, using weapons not standard to either humans or Valoria, but Elias had fought too many battles to be cornered. He moved like water, every strike deliberate, covering Kaelira's side as she deflected with her crescent blade. The canyon rang with shouts and the hiss of weapons striking stone. At one point, a bolt nearly caught Kaelira from behind, but Elias stepped into it, the impact slamming into his armor. Pain burned across his shoulder, but he didn't fall. Kaelira turned, eyes flashing, not with fear, but something sharper fury. She struck hard, her blade cutting light through the attacker, and then they were moving, breaking through a narrow side path Elias had spotted. They didn't stop running until the canyon's hum faded and the night swallowed them. Finally, at a sheltered ridge, they paused. Elias leaned against the rock, breathing hard but steady, the scorch mark on his armor still glowing faintly. "You're hurt," she said. "I've been worse," he answered, trying to make it light. She stepped closer anyway, close enough for him to feel the calm weight of her presence. "You keep doing that," she said. "What?" "Placing yourself between me and the blade." He shrugged, but the gesture was tight. "Reflex. You protect the crown. I protect the person carrying it." For a moment, she looked at him differently, the usual shield in her eyes thinned by something more human. "Do not forget who I am," she said, but her tone held no edge. "I haven't," he said softly. "Maybe that's why I do it." They camped beneath the open sky that night, stars like needles against the dark, the captive bound nearby, still silent. Kaelira sat beside the fire, the light turning her cloak bronze. Elias joined her, and for a while they said nothing, the silence between them less cold than before. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter, as if the fire deserved to hear it too. "When I was chosen to rule, I believed strength meant standing alone. Every decision, every burden, kept close. But in these few days, you," she paused, the words heavy, as if tested before release. "You do not carry your strength in silence. You share it." Elias met her gaze. "It's easier to walk into the storm when someone else sees the lightning coming." The fire popped, scattering sparks into the night. She smiled then, small but real, and it carried more weight than any ceremony. But the warmth did not last. Just before dawn, the prisoner made his move. A hidden blade, cut from his boot, glinted in the firelight. Elias was awake, faster than the strike, but the man wasn't aiming to escape, he was aiming for Kaelira. Elias blocked the blow, the two of them crashing into the dirt. The fight was short, violent, and final. When it ended, the man was down, unmoving, his blade snapped in two. Kaelira knelt beside Elias, her hand on his arm. "Are you fine?" he said, though his breath was sharp. She stared at the broken blade, at the dead man's face. "This is not rebellion," she said, almost to herself. "This is infiltration, a seed planted deep." She looked at him, something like resolve hardening in her gaze. "We cannot return to the palace blind. The council must be tested." They left the ridge at first light, the path ahead rough and uncertain. Behind them, the wind swept over the canyon, carrying away the dust and blood, but not the questions. And as they walked, side by side, Kaelira said quietly, "When this ends, Elias Ward, there will be those who call you more than apprentice. Be ready." The sixth day began with a sky too still, the kind of quiet that meant the storm was holding its breath. The airship carried them back toward the palace, its hum steady but subdued. No one spoke for a long time. The guide checked the systems, silent as stone. Kaelira sat with her arms folded, the broken blade from the night before resting on the table like an accusation. Elias watched it, thinking of the man who carried it, thinking of the look in his eyes. When Kaelira finally spoke, it was without preamble. Whoever placed him in our path did not mean to kill me with a single strike. They meant to show me I could be touched. That is the greater wound. Or they underestimated you, Elias said. Her gaze slid to him, sharp but not unkind. Underestimation is a blade too. It cuts when you expect praise. The palace rose in the distance, shining like a memory of something perfect. It looked calm, indifferent. Elias didn't trust it. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Guards stood closer. The air seemed thicker. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. The council chamber awaited them, but before they entered, Kaelira stopped. Turning to Elias, "You will stand with me," she said. "Do not speak unless I signal. Listen more than you think. Their questions will not be for answers, they will be for cracks." The doors opened to reveal a half-circle of power. The counselors sat like carved figures, faces smooth, voices ready. The queen's entrance silenced them. She walked to the center, not rushing, not smiling, the broken blade in her hand. She placed it on the floor before them. "This," she said, her voice carrying to every corner, "was aimed at me outside these walls. Planted, crafted, disguised. Its owner died trying to reach me." She let the weight of the words settle. "We have enemies inside this palace, perhaps even in this room." The ripple of murmurs was immediate. Some feigned outrage, some stayed too still. Elias watched carefully, his soldiers' instincts sharpening. Faces, eyes, movements. One counselor looked away too quickly. Another stared too long. Kaelira single quotes. Questions were measured, sharp. She spoke of old routes, sealed maps, forgotten supply lines now active. She revealed just enough to unsettle. And then, turning unexpectedly, she gestured to Elias. "Tell them what you saw," she said. It was not a request. So he did. His words were plain but precise. Machines altered, maps known only to a few. An intruder willing to die rather than speak. He did not accuse, he simply described. When he finished, the silence was heavier. One counselor leaned forward. "We trust no human with such claims," he said coldly. Kaelira single quotes S reply was lightning. "You trusted me to choose him, question him, and you question me. Do you wish to declare that openly?" The room stilled again, power balanced on the edge of a single breath. When the session ended, nothing was solved, but everything had shifted. The council had seen him not as a token but as her voice, and that voice carried weight. Later, in a private chamber, Kaelira moved like a shadow, pacing before a wide window. The city below was restless, lights shifting like unsettled water. "The council is split," she said. "Some fear me, some fear you, and some see opportunity in both. That's how knives find their mark," Elias said. She stopped pacing, turned, and stepped closer than before. "You see it too," she said quietly. "That is why I chose you." There was a moment there, unguarded. The queen who carried a nation's weight looked simply like someone tired of carrying it alone. Elias didn't move, but he held her gaze, steady and calm. "You're changing things," he said softly. "Maybe," she admitted. "Or maybe I am only showing them what they already fear, a bridge that doesn't break." Then the news came, sudden and sharp. Another attack, this time inside the palace walls. A guard loyal to Kaelira, found dead, his post abandoned. The council demanded answers. Kaelira's response was immediate. "We leave tonight." "No, council. No palace? If they want us vulnerable, let us become something they cannot predict. The night belonged to them alone. Cloaks instead of crowns, silence instead of guards. They moved through tunnels beneath the palace, passages older than any treaty. At one point, the tunnel widened into a cavern glowing with faint blue light. Here, far from the council's eyes, Kaelira spoke more freely. You asked once why I chose you. Because you do not carry fear the way we do. You carry memory. You move toward the crack, not away from it. I need that. There was something else in her voice, softer. Elias heard it and filed it away, not ready to name it. They reached an ancient gate at the city's edge. Beyond it, the wild lands waited again. Kaelira stood still for a moment, looking back at the palace's distant spires. Then, at him. What we find now, she said, will decide everything. The council believes the crown is unshakable. I intend to show them even stone can move. Elias tightened his grip on his weapon. And if the stone falls, then we will stand on the rubble, she said. The gate opened with a sound like thunder contained. The night beyond smelled of storms and something older. They stepped through, together, into the dark that waited like an unfinished question. The seventh day carried the weight of a promise. There was no court, no audience, no ceremony, no only the two of them moving through a world that felt older than any map. The wildlands opened like a living labyrinth, cliffs cut by forgotten, rivers, plains, lit by plants that glowed softly under the night. Each step was quiet but alert. Each shadow seemed to lean closer. Their guide stayed behind at the city's edge. Kaelira insisted this path needed no witnesses. It was not just a search, it was a test of trust. Elias understood this without being told. Something in her movements was different. Less guarded, but sharper too, as though every thought was a blade. By midday, they reached a valley hidden between ridges. It was silent, too silent. On the far side stood a structure half buried, like a secret left to rot, an old outpost. Human by design, but rebuilt with valorian precision. The sight of it twisted something in Elias's chest. This is ours, he said quietly. Or was. Kaelira's face was unreadable. Someone has turned it against both of us. They entered carefully. The outpost smelled of metal and ozone. Consoles flickered. Files had been wiped, but not cleanly. Elias moved like a soldier, searching for signs of life, while Kaelira traced her fingers along the walls, reading old engravings, fragments of a time when these corridors were meant for allies, not enemies. Then the silence broke. Footsteps, several, and a voice, human, cold. You were supposed to stay in your palace, Queen. Men emerged from the shadows, armed, their faces hard with purpose. They were not scavengers. They were trained. Elias counted 5, then 7. At the center stood a man he recognized, a former officer from Earth, now wearing the colors of no flag. The treaty was a leash, the man said. We cut it. Kaelira stood tall, calm. You are fools to think chaos will serve you. Killing me will end more than my reign. We don't need to kill you, he said. We just need you afraid. A weak crown means open borders. Elias stepped forward, weapon ready, but the man's smirk deepened. Ah, the apprentice, always in the wrong place at the right time. What followed was not words, but motion. The first shot hissed past them, striking a wall. Elias moved without thought, pulling Kaelira down as fire lit the room. The air was heat and noise, flashes of light cutting through shadow. Elias fired back, not to kill but to break their lines, moving always toward cover, toward the queen. Kaelira surprised him. She fought not as a distant monarch, but with precision. Her crescent blade spun, a flash of silver, cutting a path when they were cornered. They moved together, almost instinctively, his back to hers, her movements anticipating his. When the last shot faded, the air was thick with smoke and the sharp smell of spent energy. The attackers were down, some unconscious, some fled into the valley. The officer lay pinned Elias's knee on his chest. "Who do you serve?" Elias demanded. The man laughed bitterly. "No one. That's the point. Every empire falls. Yours will too." Kaelira stepped closer, eyes cool as steel. "Not today," she said. They left him bound in the outpost. The files they recovered were fragments, roots, weapon designs, communication trails leading back not to Earth, not to Valoria, but to factions on both sides. That night, back at the city gates, the palace seemed different. Not safer, but clearer. Enemies had faces now, and the council would no longer dismiss the queen's warnings. But before they stepped inside, Kaelira stopped. The stars were sharp above them, the air thin with the scent of rain. She turned to him, not as a ruler, but as someone who had shared battles and silences. "You have seen too much to be only an apprentice," she said. "I didn't come here to be more," he said quietly, "but I won't walk away either." She studied him, the edge of a smile almost there. "Good, because bridges are rare." And this one, she touched the living cuff on his wrist, now pulsing softly, is stronger than they know. When they entered the palace, the council watched in silence. Kaelira walked first, Elias behind her, but the distance between them was gone. They carried no trophies, only the quiet knowledge of shared survival. In the days that followed, rumors spread. Some said the queen had found a shadow no one else could see. Some said the human moved, like he belonged to the stones. But those who saw them together knew a truth, simpler and heavier. He had learned their ways, but she had learned his heart.